Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing ephemera, artifacts, and photographs. Oh my. Today with us, we have Virginia Dressler and Marcela Estevez. And we are going to go over a couple quick things before I turn the presentation over to them. First off, we will be taking questions at the end of today's webinar. But if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat box and we will get those answered once the presentation concludes. Also, if you experience any problems with sound or the slides aren't moving, it seems like what is happening is your signal probably just slowed down. What you need to do is close down the webinar, click the link that was sent to you, and that should solve 99% of the problems you're experiencing. And likewise, if you're on the telephone, same sort of scenario where you just need to hang up, call back in, and that will solve your problems. So I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. First, we have Virginia Dressler. Virginia is the Digital Projects Librarian at Kent State University. Her specialty areas are project management and digitalization, working primarily with the university's unique collections. She holds an MLIS from Kent State University and an MA in Art Gallery and Museum Studies from the University of Leeds. Her MA research centered on ethical preservation practices in museum collections, and her current research area includes privacy and ethical access in digital collections, and she is the author of Framing Privacy in Digital Collections with Ethical Decision Making, which was published in 2018. Virginia serves as the chair of the Ohio Preservation Council and is also a board member with the Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board. She's been a volunteer in her local historical society for the past 10 years. Also with us today is Marcela Estevez. Marcela is the head of conservation at the Ohio State University Libraries. In her role with her colleagues across the organization, she is responsible for the physical treatment, collection care, and preventative conservation of circulating and non-circulating collections. In this position, she also serves as a resource for the university, the city of Columbus, and the Ohio community by being engaged in outreach, training, consultation, and other educational activities. She is currently the chair-elect of the Ohio Preservation Council. So without further ado, Jenny, I will turn things over to you to get the presentation started.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen here. Get the right one going. Okay, thank you so much. You can hear me and see me?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for having us today. We're really excited to talk to you all. We thought we'd go over a brief outline kind of before we dive in, and then Marcel and I will be kind of trading off some of the slides as we go as well. So we want to, today we want to share some practical ways to implement some of the preventative measures that we're going to talk about. We really want to provide a lot of resources around kind of when to find a conservator and ask for consultation and how to find folks that might be in your area. And we want to say a huge thank you to the folks who took up our offer of specific questions. So we've included all the ones that we got. So we're very excited to chat about the specific ones. We'll definitely leave some time for questions and answers. So, think of things as we go too. We'll have definitely more time to chat. And if we run out of time today, we can definitely follow up with you as well. We have a lot of resources, some of them kind of format specific, with some of the things we'll talk about too. So our hope is really kind of providing all of this information and links out and kind of talk you through, how do you kind of work through some of these issues in your own institutions or your own house or your own situation. And then last but not least, we want to share some information about the Ohio Preservation Council, where we both serve as executive officers. So first, some basics. One point we thought we really wanted to kind of hone in on before we drive, some of the specific questions, really thinking about kind of that difference between kind of preservation at large and conservation. So preservation, you're really looking at, all of the kind of conditions around your collections, kind of the environment, that kind of thing around the things that we're going to be talking about later, where conservation is really more kind of to the item level or the collection level. And it's kind of important, I think, to keep those two things in mind, thinking you can address things that might have conservation issues at an item level, but thinking about a more holistic preservation context of where these materials and collections live as well. So start with some small goals. It might be, depending on your situation, it might be really overwhelming. And I think, I take this kind of advice with, cleaning out that closet or area of your house that might just be, this place where there's things in there that you want to address and save and store. But it might be really overwhelming to look in and think, where do I even start? So we've provided some resources later on kind of questions to ask, small steps to take. But don't get overwhelmed. I think especially with so much going on in our lives, just finding a small spot and making some small but clear goals, looking at some best practices and benchmarks, and maybe not everything that we do is necessarily the highest preservation standard, but kind of working towards some of these things and not getting too overwhelmed when you can't do all of the things all at once. So again, kind of thinking between the item level activities and the collection level, looking at kind of your home and your storage or your storage facilities, if it's at an institution, and really thinking about how does this kind of project or item kind of fit in with that larger kind of collection aspect. And I think with this, I will hand it to Marcela.
Hello, everybody. Well, nice to be here to share some of this information and hoping it is of help to everybody who is attending. Then, like Jeannie mentioned, when we are confronted with collections, either personal or in institutions, large and small, of course, we want to take care of everything and every single object, but focusing on preventive conservation measures, I think, is the best way to go, unless you have a very specific item that people have submitted questions about very specific items. Then I have included a list of the different aspects that are included in preventive care. And of course is proper handling, which sometimes we are not thinking really, and I will expand on that, how we are moving objects around, and if we have created the right space to, protect them while we are doing, where we are involved with other activities. Then environmental control and monitoring, those are pretty common in large institutions, and I think at the in smaller institutions we don't think so much about that, or in our own homes even. Although I know people tend to put the humidifiers in basements, we are pretty aware of that. Pest management, also when we have attics or basements, where we store our collections is really important to understand if our spaces are secure to avoid entrance of pests, or if we have any rest of old food or trash that might be conducive to the presence of different pests. And then how do we maintain and clean, right? We sometimes forget. We have had things stored in institutions that have people access to that place, have they access and clean that place, or we store things and we forget that probably regular cleaning is something we need to do. And we do that even in our large institutions. We look at our collections in the stacks and in the storage areas, and we do that in regular basis. And of course, how we think about storing, and a lot of people submitted questions about this, which is the best way to store my photographs or other ephemera or other objects. Then I will touch a little on that topic as well. And like Jeannie says, we have plenty of resources at the end. I'm doing just an overview, and then there will be plenty of resources once we share the slides with links that include where to purchase the materials and more further recommendations from different prestigious institutions that provide resources about conservation. Then, we item level activities, right? First, we want to clarify, and the questions probably reflect this. You are not going to try, there are tons of videos online to explain how to fix stuff. We want to clarify, never try to address treatment yourself. You never know what other type of damage that will cause. Then to the object, always consult with a professional, and they will, generally speaking, when you reach out to a professional, there won't be any cost up front. Then it's easy to find a conservator in the American Institute of Conservation website you can identify, you know, like Ginny put in the website, she put this clarification, is by format, specialty, where the conservatory is located. They will be happy to talk with you, set up a meeting, even online, talk about your object, and give you a general idea of what could be done. They won't charge you anything, like I said up front. Then feel free to reach out and get a sense of what they are thinking could be done to, you know, perform treatment and bring the object to a better condition. Then when you have a collection or a group of objects, large collection, small, where to start is, okay, like Ginny says, it's really overwhelming. If you first, when you first enter in contact with the objects, make sure that you are not getting engaged with the objects without PPE. Now, with the pandemic, we are very aware of what PPE is. Make sure you have a mask and gloves. Even if you are not sure there are condition issues, protect yourself. That's the first step. Especially if collections have been stored in basements for a long time, there can be mold presence or pest presence. And I put a picture of mold presence that's really scary. So just to create more of the idea of what you could be confronted with. Yeah. Always take before and after pictures. That is helpful also when we feel really overwhelmed about the situation and we are going to engage with the organization of the items we have at hand, to kind of remind us where we started and how far we have gone. Like Ginny says, it's very easy to get overwhelmed, especially when there is a lot of material to process. Make sure you have plenty of space, clear surfaces, cover them with paper or plastic, so you can separate the objects and do an assessment. And even you can do photo documentation of before and after, because if you consider that some of them might be candidates for conservation treatment, that will make it easier to facilitate that documentation to the conservatory you're consulting. And then, of course, you will know when to contact a professional because of condition issues. And like I said before, recognize your limits. We are tempted to, oh, I can clean it, I can use a vacuum cleaner, I can use a rag, and then all of a sudden you chip painting from some valuable object, or you try to separate photographs and they are stuck and you are, you know, producing further damage in the image. Then when it comes to handling, this seems like common sense, but like I said, you know, we don't know really what the condition of the item is. Then we might try to grab it and then something falls apart. Be really mindful that you have not been, if something that has been stored away for a long time, probably you do not remember, right, how those objects worked, or you open boxes and you assume things look like the last time you saw them. Be very mindful and how you will be handling them. I put a list. I don't want to go over everything, but just make sure also that you have probably some cards that are padded where you can put your objects to move it to other places. And like I say, make sure your space is, you have plenty of space to lay out all the objects. If you are confronted with some materials that are moldy, I suggest you bag them and seal the bag and put it away. And then contact the conservators to see what the next steps would be. Now, when it comes to environmental control, mostly we are going to focus on temperature, relative humidity, and light. Then, like I say in the slide, different artifacts can withstand different levels of humidity and temperature. For institutions large like us, we are really mindful of creating those conditions for different type of materials. There is difference between the conditions we provide for photographic materials to what we do with books and paper, but generally speaking, I think we put a range in the slides, 59 to 76 Fahrenheit, and that could be a little more restrictive depending your ability to do so, you know, but we go in general from 55 to 72, minus 5, plus 5, same with the humidity, relative humidity levels, allowing there some, if you are going to have set points, some flexibility of what your range will be. But the most important part when we are trying to control environment is to have a consistent environment. We don't want fluctuations. It might be you don't have the ideal condition and you might be in a medium of 70 degree Fahrenheit and 55 RH, having that consistency with the fluctuations. Objects are hygroscopic and the humidity raises. That's the ability to absorb humidity and release humidity in the environment, especially with some objects, of course, depending the materials they are made of. That will be parchment is very sensitive. Photographs are pretty sensitive because the gelatin tends to swell when the relative humidity is really high. Then what you want is consistency. So you don't have the objects shrink and expand as the humidity levels raise and, you know, go low. Then, yeah, and then of course, in that consistency means you are not going to turn off your systems during night or any time of the day. Keeping them consistent is the most important part. Then in this slide, I'm addressing some of the instruments you can use, but mostly it's addressing, it's going to the point that we need to monitor what's going on, and there are different ways to do it. We put some instruments here that are listed, as you can see in the slide, and there will be more resources at the end of the presentation. But if you want to do a monitoring, basic monitoring of the spaces you have, just buying cheap readers. You can buy in Amazon online for temperature and relative humidity. We have done that when we didn't have data loggers from which we can upload data. We have a software to do that. Then you can put those on a shelf and every day goes and look at different time of the days if you are concerned for a while until you can find a better system that you can put in place to do the monitoring. For the light, we don't realize, probably many of us have noticed with items we have at home. Of course, we cannot, you know, with our eye, we cannot really detect how much damage the light is producing in the objects. We have paintings we have hanging around the house, photographs, but any damage that is happening in the objects produced by light is accumulative and non-reversible. Then it can produce discoloration, yellowing, even embrittlement. We don't realize we might have a drawing hanging on the wall. It looks perfectly fine. We remove it from the frame and paper is completely brittle. Then avoiding exposure to light is really important. We have also, you know, we know in some cases objects will be, historic houses, objects will be exhibited permanently, then trying to figure out what better qualities of artificial light, changing to LED lights. We avoid having UV transmission. They are more energy efficient, which is another benefit, and the bulbs last longer. There is also another link for resources that explains a little more what are the pros and cons of other types of artificial light. If you have natural resources of light, make sure you are using shades, you know, even if it's in your house, at times of the day. Make sure you close the shades. You can apply UV protective film in windows, mostly for institutions, probably not at home. Even for exhibit cases, you can apply UV film to protect the objects exhibited in cases. And of course, make the practice of turning off the lights when possible. Also, there are motion sensors for lights. If you have small institutions, but you don't have many resources, and you cannot put LED lights, and you have incandescent lights, you might want to think of a motion sensor so lights turn off when people are not present in the area. Pest management. Well, this is almost like common sense. We do it at home also, right? We put traps under the sink. This is not very different. We want to make sure that either insects or mold or mildew are not present in our collections. And we do it regularly in our institution. We have traps, and we have, in fact, a map of the locations, and we know where the traps are located, and every month we go there and collect the traps, and we see what type of insects we identify. And you find all type of bugs, but not necessarily means they are harmful to the collection. But if you are finding silverfish, you might need to not react right away, but see, it might be you got some items that had silverfish and they were trapped and no longer are there. You change the traps and continue to monitor. If that's the case, then you can contact somebody who could treat the area, but you need to be very mindful in doing a little research of what type, or talking with the company to see what type of treatment they will be providing. Some can be really harmful to the collections as well. In the case of mold and mildew, I think I need to add this to the slides, and I apologize. There are several companies that really do a specific treatment for elimination of mold, and they will pick up the items from you and do the clean and do the treatment. You need to be extremely careful. Cleaning mold, can be harmful to your own health. Then, yeah, minimum handling, bagging, and contacting companies that can treat them is the best way to go. Unless you have somebody in your staff who understands preservation. Some people use the outdoors to do mold cleaning. That's an option, but always consulting with somebody who has some background in preservation is really important. Regular cleaning and housekeeping. Here I'm focusing on the cleaning of the areas. And I mentioned in the beginning, we want to do a regular cleaning, mostly because particles like dust, dirt, ash, they tend to deposit on the objects, and that is conducive to the growth of mold, and also insects can benefit from, food that is growing in the objects. Then cleaning the area, I wouldn't get so engaged with cleaning the objects themselves. Probably light dusting, but you need to be really mindful, like I said, that can produce some damage to the object. Then something that is really, and a lot of people have asking the questions, what type of enclosures I use, envelopes, boxes. That's a really important part of preventive conservation or preventive care, enclosures, because they create, if you cannot really control the environmental conditions in the space where you have stored your objects, the housing creates a microclimate. It's a second layer of protection for the objects. But you need to make sure you are buying, we were talking with Chini, what we call archival quality. That's relative. We don't know. Then it's important that you understand what materials have been used to make these enclosures, envelopes or boxes or even plastic enclosures. You want to make sure that if it's paper, it's acid-free, lignin-free, in some cases it's buffer, and that means an alkaline reserve, which is really good when materials are very acidic, but also not good for photographs. Then understanding what type of housing you are providing to your collections is really important. Now, for larger objects, you know, we did put resources for vendors where you can identify different types of storage options as well as for different types of objects. And I think this is what I was referring. You know, archival quality, the term is not regulated, then we cannot trust when it says it's only archival. And like I said, focus on the type of material that was used by the manufacturer, and that's pretty much, yeah, what you should be concerned with. And when we share the slides, you will see I did make a point of adding some links that have further information for each of the topics I have addressed that are included in the preventive care aspect of collections.
All right, now we will jump into the submitted attendee questions. So like I said, if you have some questions that you didn't get in advance, you know, you drop them into the chat if we have time to talk today, or we're also happy to follow up with specifics as well. But thank you to the folks who submitted not only questions, but images. This was really helpful, I think, as we kind of worked on this presentation and kind of what the kind of themes and concerns were. So no particular order. I will start with what we called submitted question number 1. How do I preserve a fur coat? This one I actually reached out to. We've got some textile and fashion professionals at our Kent State Museum who deal with these kind of collections all the time. I have not, in my, I don't know, 16 or 17 years working in assorted collections, I've not worked with textiles before, so they had recommendations. There's 2 links I'll share in a slide more towards our resources, but the general recommendation was to lay flat. You know, even having textiles and hangers can produce stress points. Ideally, cold storage, although some of the resources that our museum folks shared with me, it does depend on kind of the particulars of the textile or fur, so you might want to kind of check more in depth with your particulars. Again, looking at kind of a reduced temperature and humidity, reduced light exposure and handling. If you have, you know, some kind of acid-free box with plenty of room, you don't really want to cramp the material. And then there's some recommendations too for easy ways to kind of clean the coat, whether, you know, this is something you might be able to do, or, you know, reach out to the folks on the AIC list if this is a service that you're looking for someone else to do too. But and then again, that general kind of monitoring for pests. I think textiles are kind of particularly at risk just with the makeup of the material. So that's definitely a good one to keep in mind.
And Chini, I wanted to just, now I remember, we did have a fur coat in the collection, and there are condition issues, and we reach out. It's not so easy to locate, but if you contact museums of natural history, in general, they know people who work with fur objects.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Number 2, photographs at my institution have not had a lot of care over the years. Before I came, they took down the originals from the wall, some framed, others glued on backing boards with plastic over them tacked to the walls. They were put in the lateral filing cabinet, framed, unframed, glued to backing boards, newspaper articles, everything in stacks. I've been scanning these images at least 600 DPI. My questions are, how should they be stored, flat or hanging file? I've been removing them from frames and putting them in archival safe clear sleeves. Is it safe to put the sleeves in standard craft envelopes? Is there a way to allow the public to view them digitally without allowing them to be copied? And am I on the right track? And I do always appreciate the am I on the right track question. I think for the most part, I think you are. Some best practices with photographs. Horizontal storage is preferred, and most of the times with prints and oversized photographs. It kind of lends to a better overall support and protection of the images. And also kind of prevents binding. In some circumstances, perhaps with the frame one, perhaps laying flat in archival boxes might be an exception to that one. Again, well-fitting with lids that can be stacked together and provide some additional support. The exception to that, I think another exception is negatives. Vertical storage is preferred for that, and we've linked to Care of Photographs page by the Northeast Document Conservation Center, which has some really great information if you want to go even more down the rabbit hole. We thought we'd make a couple extra notes for framed and glued items. You can always, consult conservator before addressing. Marcela and I were saying the, worst feeling we've had is getting a stack of photographs that have gotten wet and kind of molded to each other, and it's very difficult to kind of unbind these. So really reaching out to folks who specialize, especially on the photographic conservation, is really key. For the craft envelopes, I did some research on that. They do make a flavor of craft envelopes that's acid-free, but it looked by and large that theirs might be more acidic. So the recommendation there is either, if you have a way of testing to see if yours are acidic, but really try to stay towards, acid-free materials and envelopes. Even if this is on sort of an outer layer, it's still kind of best practices. On discouraging downloads, this was another great question. I found a website, it had a couple different options for kind of discouraging folks with downloads. You can disable a save as option if you kind of look into some of your settings on your website. An option I've seen probably more frequently is using a lower resolution image. So if you go more towards maybe 90 to 150 DPI just for the web version. That could be a solution. You can apply, copyright notice. I've seen some institutions too that apply like a digital watermark as well. So some things to think about. I don't know if there's like a great one that solves all the things, because even I think disabling that save as option, you can still crafty people, I think, can still find some workarounds for that too. So that is a tougher one. On the DPI, 600 is definitely what is called the 4-star rating with the FADGI, which I pulled up a screen print here with the prints and photographs. I think my only other thing that I'd recommend with that as well is, making sure you're saving that 600 DPI scan in, kind of a preferable lossless file format, such as a TIFF or JPEG 2000. Be sure, depending on the content, that these are grayscale or RGB color mode. There are a lot of settings in your scanner software that kind of impact the file format and all of those things. And I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but if you go through your software settings, you can usually find some ways to make sure that you're saving in a lossless mode. And then I've linked there's guidelines through the National Archives as well as the Federal Agency Digitization Guidelines. As well, they've got all kinds of information kind of specific to, the format that you're looking at. So again, for photographs, 600 is definitely great. Usually text, the recommendation is anywhere from 300 to 400 DPI, depending on what you're scanning. But check those resources. They have really great information on just about every format, although I'll say that there's not inclusion for all of them. I think AV and textiles are two that from today's talk that are not included, but they've got a lot of great information there too. Submitted question number 3, military service information. I have paper copies of everyone's enlistment and discharge paperwork. Do we still need it? We're talking World War I and II. Photos, we have so many. Some of them contain pictures of people whose identities are a complete mystery, but the photos are pretty cool. Is there a home for them besides my home? I would probably extend that to most early 20th century ephemera. A copy of my grandparents' deed, for example, where they paid $4,000 for their house is cool, but would someone else like to have it and store it? Great question. On the military paper enlistment, I would say yes. Keep these materials, especially World War I and II, mostly from a genealogy standpoint. These are really interesting, I think, for a lot of folks doing this kind of work. There's a couple sites where I think you can digitize and upload this information too. So if it's something you'd like to share out. My other note was there was a fire at the National Archives in the early 70s that destroyed a huge percentage of Army records from this particular era. Returning servicemen were supposed to file copies of their discharge papers with their county recorders, but as we know, people don't always do the paperwork side of things. So I would say my inclination would be yes to save this. Photographs and deeds, you can check with, local library, historical society, archives, local college and university. I know here at Kent, we've got a number of local history photograph collections that have been personal donations. So definitely, make some calls, chat with folks. They'll probably want to see, if not the whole collection, a sample. So depending on the content, there might be interest there. With the deed, I think that would be another thing to kind of ask, along with the photographs too. If you're looking for places to do some of the digitization too, I would, if you're near the Cleveland, Toledo, Columbus, or Cincinnati areas, they have these digi-hubs. These are free digital labs open to the public. They are really phenomenal resources. They will kind of work you through the best practices and guidelines, like the photography question we just had. And they're really great. I think they're just great folks to talk to. They've got, I'd say, for the most part, equipment that can handle a lot of the kind of basic digitization. You can also ask too if there's interest in submitting some of these digital images to Ohio Memory through some of your local libraries and archives. That's a great place for some local photography as well. So I put in links there. And then on the image recognition, one thing I saw a really interesting presentation from Aaron O'Donovan at Columbus Metro Library. And I think one of his COVID pandemic projects was he took a lot of their unidentified local history photographs and ran them through this tool called TinEye. It's a reverse image search tools. And he said, while it wasn't, 100% accurate, it gave them a lot of names of people in the photographs. And that I just thought was really kind of fascinating to think about, and maybe a little scary too, of what tools are out there that can kind of help with this kind of thing. But depending how much time you want to put into this, I thought I'd recommend that as well. Submitted question number 4. I've recently inherited a framed image of my third great-grandparents who were farmers in Floyd County, Indiana in the 1800s. I need help identifying what it is and how to take care of it and preserve it. It's in a frame in questionable condition, and I've not removed it for investigation since I don't know what I'm dealing with and do not want to do harm. From stuff I've read, I believe it could be an ambrotype or a caladian, but I'm not even sure what those are. It's taken sometime between the mid and late 1800s. I think there's 2 pieces of glass taped together and framed. I'm not sure what faces or glass the image is on. The glass side is comparably large at a 10 by 12, and the same image is found on a gravesite. Mine appeared to be cropped. Would there be 2 originals? So what would I need to preserve this treasure? This was a great one, and Marcela and I were just chatting this morning on this particular one, and this was one where I think we both had the same idea that you'd really have to talk to a photo conservator, because this is really outside of the realm of both of our kind of experiences too. And I think you're definitely on the right track, without causing kind of additional harm, trying to reframe it, really talking to someone who knows this. So we definitely love to put you in touch with a photo conservator. I also found a link on a short guide to kind of identifying different film bases too, if that's of interest as well. But that's definitely a really tricky one. And I think, you're smart on not unframing it and kind of handling it. So kudos.
Yeah, and for that, we don't have many photo conservators in the area, but we do have a photo conservator in OSU. And I'm sure she would be happy to connect with you and look at the photo and make some recommendations, you know, not necessarily means treatment, but what else can you do for further protection of what you have at hand. There is not much we do with our photographic collections, like ambrotypes and tintypes or daguerreotypes at OSU. But, you know, there is always some type of housing that can be recommended, of course, removing them from a source of light and what I addressed before, but she would be happy to talk with you, yeah, for further recommendations.
Submitted question number 5. We have several old marriage certificates and diplomas I really don't know how to store. They vary in size and medium. I also have several articles of clothing from the early 1900s and some books and Bibles from the 1800s. What do you suggest? Another great question. We've got some textile specific recommendations on kind of cleaning and storage. A really great blog from the Smithsonian on how do I store antique textiles at home. For Bibles, we looked, there's a recommendation to kind of remove anything that's kind of loose, that might be kind of within the pages, following a lot of the safe storage practices we've talked about. There is one company that sells a kind of out-of-the-box purchasable preserve your family Bible. I don't usually do company plugs, but it's this link here from Gaylord. They've got a step-by-step guide. I was looking around for anything else comparable, and other than kind of doing the shopping on your own and kind of measuring out box sizes, it seemed to be kind of the best bang for your buck. There's also some bookbinders if you're looking into kind of additional preservation of the actual book, if that's something of interest, or if it's more just kind of storage and housing. For family Bibles, there's usually lots of kind of extra goodies inside, sometimes handwritten genealogies, sometimes you know, little tidbits that you could digitize kind of parts of that if you think that's something of interest. And then if you're looking for donation ideas, some local historical societies do take family Bibles as well. So kind of reach out maybe to your local historical society as well. Diplomas and marriage certificates. If these are already flat, we'd recommend sort of a larger acid-free archival box to store them in with kind of separating tissues between, you know, kind of each item. If they're rolled, they would need to be flattened, and this might be something you'd want to chat with a conservator. This is a relatively straightforward process I think a lot of paper conservators deal with all the time.
Yeah, if you try to unroll and the paper is brittle, you know, you might produce some cracks or tears, then you want to avoid trying to unroll it yourself, yeah.
Yeah. And this is our last submitted question, and perhaps the most confounding. This is playbills. We've got several playbills from the late 1800s on the wall of an old opera house that we do not believe they are going to be able to find funding to save with the amount of neglect it has had over the past several decades. We're looking for best practices for their preservation, so at least we can save some of the history of the building. This one I really sympathize, because this is a really tough one. It's looks fairly, you know, large and complex. Marcela and I were chatting this morning, and you know, this is something neither one of us has really dealt with. You know, there are folks who do probably more on kind of the mural side, but you know, kind of cleaning and protective sealant. But if it's a space that, you know, may be going away, I don't know. This was a pickling one. My only other thought too is, you know, you could search to kind of see, are there paper copies of that same kind of playbill? But that's certainly, I think that's a tougher one, and I don't know if I have anything definitive on this one, sad to say.
All right, thanks for those questions. We got a couple more here for you if you want to do those now.
Sure, and I forgot I have a little plug for Ohio Preservation Council too, if I can do
Sure,
those.
go ahead.
So Ohio Preservation Council, this is a coalition of preservationists, conservators, librarians, and archivists, curators, recommenders. And really our mission is around kind of preservation education and supporting preservation activities within the state of Ohio, such as this webinar today. So thank you for having us. We do meet quarterly. You do not have to be a member to come to our quarterly meetings. We have one next week, Thursday, November 14th at 10 a.m. We have a 1-hour business meeting followed up by a presentation at 11. This week we decided to kind of continue on the Halloween theme, and this is Stories from the Archives, Eerie Objects. And we've got the I think she's the archivist from the Wexner Center of the Arts, and then 2 librarians from the University of Akron. And I put a link. Feel free to join us. We'd love to have you. We're also going to roll out an Ask a Conservator forum for our membership starting early next year. So questions like the ones that we answered today, we're hoping this will be a service we can kind of promote between our executive team, many of who are working conservators, to kind of help, point folks in the right direction or provide information. We've got a symposium coming up next August, which will have more information kind of coming up in the new year on that as well, but it's August 1st at Columbus Metro. If you are interested in membership, I think our dues are fairly reasonable. Individual dues are $30. Institutional level memberships can be from $30 to $250. More information on our website. This gives you access to some of our grants, just discounted registration fees, opportunities to serve on council and collaborate with colleagues. We also have some grants too. So if you're a nonprofit, you can look at these $4,999 grants. This is rolled out with the State Library of Ohio. We just announced our 2024 winners, I think just last week, but this can be an item or small group of items that this funds can be used for conservation efforts too. So definitely look at that. We like to hand out money. That's probably my favorite part, the whole job. And then we did have sort of mountain of resources that we didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole today, but we will be sure to save or send these slides with all of these links as well. But we would love to dive into questions too.
Perfect, thank you guys. The first question is from Larry. In our commercial photo lab group, we sometimes get calls from the public whose photos have suffered flood damage. How often the photos are melded in stacks? What is the best way to hold and store those masses of photos until a conservator can deal with those?
Oh.
I would say a freezer, a freezer, but not everybody has access to a freezer. There is no easy answer for this, but I would say if you can put them in some type of plastic container and isolate it, because probably there will be mold growth in those photographs, and you really want to isolate them from any other species, because mold can spread and also is harmful to humans, then yeah, put it in a plastic container in a separate space and try to contact a conservator as soon as possible. And nowadays it's quite easy, because when you identify the conservator, you can have a Zoom meeting. They can tell you what else you can do just to tackle that right away. But yeah, that would be my recommendation. I don't know if any other comments for that question, or if, yeah, I think probably what would be good for that is having some of the resources at hand to share with people. If you think you need us to provide that, somehow we can get that to you through the bank. Yeah.
Thanks. So our next question here, it's about paintings, but I think it could apply to a lot of different things. So in the past, obviously, a lot of people lived in homes that had smoking and nicotine residue is on this painting. What kind of advice do you have for people to remove nicotine from the surfaces of their artifacts?
if there is other is one path to treatment, if it's staining, probably
I would say it's probably a residue.
a residue, then probably contact an objects conservator. If it's objects, you know, it's a variety of materials. There are some private practices that have group of conservators with different specialties. And here in Ohio is the Intermuseum Conservation Association in Cleveland, the Mackay Lodge. Also, they have different specialties, but that would be something that needs to be tackled by the conservator, probably. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question here, what is a good way to get the smell of mothballs out of textiles?
Oh, I'm not a textiles conservator.
Oh.
Yeah, we don't have that expertise here. Mothball.
I don't know, but I am willing to reach out to my
Yeah.
fashion museum experts across campus.
Sounds good. It's definitely an awful smell, so
It's terrible, right?
these people. Our next question here is from Laura. She says that she has a scrap of the original 1895 carpet from her building, and they had it reproduced and installed throughout the building. She wondered if there is a safe way to display the original sample that she still has.
Oh, wow, great question.
What is it? Is a
sample of the original carpet from the building.
Oh, carpet. That's almost like a textile. Then they want they want to have it just protected.
Just to protect it, and if they presented it on a wall, what's a good way to display it so that it can be displayed without damaging it further?
Yeah, probably you want some type of acrylic box, but because you don't want a regular frame for that, like you don't want it mounted and then tied in a frame, but some type of acrylic translucent box that I think if you go to some good framing store, they will have some recommendations for that. Just make sure that whatever is protecting the carpet is not touching the carpet, the acrylic in the front, that there is a space. Mm-hmm. That's what I would recommend. Yeah.
Thanks. A couple questions on legal issues here. So this person is asking, a couple of our local institutions have scanned photographs donated to them over the years and are now claiming copyright over them. The photos were taken in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Is there a reliable way to handle copyright issues with digitalized photographs?
Oh, great question. I used to report to our head of copyright, so I feel like I can get a good answer to this. In general, there's a pretty hard cutoff for what's called unpublished works, which I believe photographs fall under. Let me try and find some information, and I thought what I could offer in addition to that mothball question was kind of put these in an email with our slides and send along. But I think there are some pretty handy guides out there, especially if you know kind of a ballpark date, and if they are older, that's certainly helpful as well.
Thanks, Jenny. And our next question kind of revolving around digital stuff again. So, we've now had a good almost 30 years of digital photographs existing. What are some guidelines that you would suggest for carrying of digital items going into the future?
Yeah, that is a great question. So digital preservation is like, I'd say a whole different kind of ballpark than a lot of the kind of physical conservation that we've talked about today. I think that one of the best guidelines that I've really liked as not just a practitioner, but even kind of taking this home to, my digital images off my phone, definitely keeping lots of copies of digital files is recommended. There's a digital preservation tactic that's called locks, which is lots of copies keep stuff safe. The premise for this is that you have 3 copies in different locations. Here at Kent, we have 2 that are on the cloud and 1 that's on a physical server. And what we're doing with this digital preservation piece is we're kind of checking all of the digital files are kind of intact. If one goes corrupt, you have 2 backups. But this is a piece that I think we're still kind of in our infancy on kind of developing good kind of tools and platforms for this kind of work. And it is tedious. It's not the most exciting thing to do, you know, with your weekends or evenings, is backing up, you know, photos upon photos. But it's so important because I feel like not only in what I've seen here at work, but at home, it's so easy for digital files to corrupt. You know, software changes, you update something on your computer, and then you open, say, an old version of Word. And we probably all had experiences where, you know, you open an old file and it just doesn't open anymore. So digital preservation is really kind of creating these stable environments, and also kind of regularly updating and checking your files with backup. So there's a lot more there. I can definitely put some more resources together on that as well.
Thanks, Jenny. And we have one more question here currently, so if anyone in the audience has any final questions, please get those typed in now. Last question here is about storing of porcelain and silverware and things like that. They were talking about their family collection. What are some good ways to store those so that they don't crack and tarnish and things like that?
I'm not an objects conservator, but I can say, of course, good padding around the porcelains. It depends where you are storing it. If something that you're putting away in a storage space, or you are planning to store it inside furniture that's currently in your living room, that makes a difference. But padding the drawers, right, or padding the shelves, if something falls over, at least you have something to, you know, catch the porcelains and avoid, you know, cracking. For if it's going to be stored away, I would say that probably some like felt, some boxes covered with felt, but also wrapping the porcelain in some type of textile and then placing it. And I think what is really important when we are storing to think is that the boxes are not too large, that they are containing the objects pretty well. And ideally, we are not storing several objects together, but that's not realistic. Then make sure that they are separated by the textile when you place them together in the box, and there is not much wiggling room, you know, for the objects that are stored. For silverware, I don't know much about metals. There are some recommendations for some type of kind of synthetic resins to apply to the silverware to avoid tarnish, but you know, that also would be something that you can talk with a conservator, discuss with a conservator, but probably there are some of the resources we put online, but we can provide more information if needed.
We got one more question here, and I absolutely love it, from our friend Dick. How do we decide what is worth saving?
That's the 1 million question.
Oh.
In which context? Is that an institution, or can we have a more follow-up to that?
I think maybe just we could answer that in just terms of personal things. So when you inherit things,
personal things,
heirlooms.
Yeah.
But I'm sure Dick would also like to know about institutional things. But I think to keep it fun, let's keep it to heirlooms and things like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That is a really tough question, and I was sharing with Marcela. I had the kind of scenario of having to go through a loved one's. They were sort of our, you know, unofficial family history keeper, and that is incredibly hard. And I did find some resources that I put together in here. New York State Archives had, I think, some really great prompts to ask yourself. Sometimes, you know, it can get you thinking about this kind of thing. It's a really difficult question, though. And then there was also, let me see where I found it. The National African American History and Culture Museum put together this Family Treasures Toolkit, free downloadable how-to guide. Also some great ideas in there as well. But yeah, if you find the answer to that, I would love to know.
I think it comes to a family matter, you know, who wants to take what and who is more fond of what in many ways. And that's always the dilemma, I think, with within families, you know.
Yeah. And in our situation, we just decided to box it up and send it to my dad to decide. So I can get fun with that. So
yeah.
All right. Thanks once again for everyone attending today. And a great thank you to both Marcela and to Jenny today for doing this presentation with us. It was absolutely wonderful. So closing remarks from us. Our next webinar is in a couple weeks. So we're going to be having a presentation with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce on the state of Ohio tourism. So be sure to check that out. We'll be sending the link out shortly for registering for that. And also next month on December 17th at the Ohio State House, we'll be having our Appalachian Heritage Luncheon. And I believe we have 8 success stories this year to be sharing with everyone. So you can find more information on that on our website, heritageohio.org. So thank you everyone for attending today. Thanks to our presenters, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.